The Archive. In the capital city, in the 4th year of the High Keeper's tenure, in the great archive of the Order where the lamps are kept low so the heat will not eat the manuscripts, a young brother named Aldous was reading a thing he had no leave to read. He had been reading it for 3 hours. He had been looking for it for 2 years. The restricted room was not guarded with any drama. A door, a lock, a list of who held keys, and the understanding that one did not ask to enter without a stated purpose and a senior keeper's mark set beside it. 2 years passed. During a span of honest access, Aldous had pressed a borrowed key into a cake of wax. He had cut its copy from a brass blank with his own hands, which were cleverer than he let the Order know. He had told no one. He had a gift for not telling. The thing before him was not one text but a sheaf bound together reports, letters, copied accounts under a heading that came out of the old scholar's tongue as something near to conditions of the Eastern Seal, observations of the first keepers. The leather had gone dark and stiff with age. The pages were copies in a careful hand, perhaps 150 years old. The first writings, if they survived at all, were not here. What the accounts held, Aldous had been taught to call by other names his whole life. The teaching he had studied for 8 years said the eastern lands were corrupted by old powers, sealed away for the protection of the living world, the boundary held by the Order's blessing and the favor of the gods. He had never found the teaching satisfying. It explained nothing a man could use, and it disagreed. On 3 points he had checked himself, with older books that no one read anymore. The accounts said something else, and it was both plainer and worse. The boundary was not a blessing laid upon the land. It was a thing built, a mechanism, very old and very large, made by people who had understood what lay on the far side better than anyone now living. The markers were not wholly objects. They were parts. The accounts were flat about this in a way the teaching never was. The makers had not destroyed what was on the sealed side. They had shut it in. Understanding of the work would fade, the writers said, with each generation that kept it. The work itself would not fade. It would hold as it was made to hold until it did not, and the failing, when it came, would not be slow. What was shut in, the accounts would not name plainly. They called it, in the old tongue, something near to the former tenants, those who had been here before, over whom or beside whom or through some bargain with whom the present world had been laid down. Not gods, not the things named in the rites. Older than either, and with no good word in any tongue Aldous could read. And the boundary was not one thing, held one way. This struck him harder than the rest, for it stood in no teaching he had ever heard. The accounts spoke of stations along the line, and the writers plainly did not agree on how many there were, nor on how each was held. One described a station kept by a single warden, alone. A later hand had written in the margin beside it, "At the hill station the tribes keep the line, with rites they no longer understand, passing the keeping down as a man passes down a song whose meaning he cannot say." Another margin, in a third hand and half rubbed away, "The empty station holds still, and none writing here can say what holds it." And under that, re-inked harder by someone later again, "The fed station is no station at all. Read the tribute accounts, and do not believe what its keepers call themselves." It was as though Aldous thought the great work had been finished once and then mended ever after by different hands in different years, each patching the stretch nearest to them with whatever came to hand, until the seam was less a single wall than a long line of mismatched repairs, and no one now alive held the whole of it in his mind. There was a line he kept returning to, in the margin of the third account, in a hand that was not the main writer's, set down by someone who had read it and wished to add a thing of his own, a single sentence. "The warden at the far station has held his post since the first marking, and does not age as other men age. He does not explain this, and we have long since stopped asking." Aldous read it again. Beneath it, fainter, in a different ink, "The northern reckoning ends here. After this season no account comes down from that station. and we cannot say whether the keeper failed or merely ceased to write. The line is presumed held. We have no way to know. Presumed held. He sat with those two words a long while, a station gone silent for the better part of 100 years, and the whole comfort of the order resting on the presumption that silence meant a thing still warped. One more came near the end, in the careful main hand, set down without comment, as if the writer had not trusted himself to add any. The former tenants are not always asleep. Those who keep the nearer stations report that the keeping is not a matter of stone alone, that on some nights the line is held the way a man holds a thread in the dark to a thing on the far end of it, and that a thing on some nights pulls back. He was on his third reading of the whole sheaf when the lock turned and the lamp of the keeper of the archive fell across the page. The council met 3 days after, in a stone chamber with tall windows and a thin winter light. 13 elders of the order sat in judgment, and Aldous gave the best account of himself that he could, which was a poor one, because the best account began by insisting the documents mattered, and the council had no wish to hear it. The charges went as such charges go. He had let his given work rot. He had questioned those set over him, and more than once. He had cut a false key, which was the count that had no answer. He said the accounts described a danger that was not past but present and growing in the eastern districts. He was told that was not his to judge. He said someone ought to judge it. He was told someone had, long ago, and that this was the very reason the documents were shut away. Elder Osric presided, old, thin of voice, more disappointed than angry, which wore at Aldous worse than anger would have. Elder Clement was younger and harder, and treated each of Aldous' arguments as a thing to be swept from the road on the way to a punishment that had plainly been settled before the doors were shut. The eldest man in the room said almost nothing for the first hour. Elder Malachi, older than any there by 15 years, with the stillness of a man who has sat through enough of these to know that waiting costs nothing. He had served in the eastern provinces in his youth, this much was known of him, and had risen through the order steadily for 50 years, outlasting 3 high keepers, never seeming to reach for a thing and never once failing to be in the room when it mattered. He sat on the council because to have left him off it would have required an explanation. When he spoke, it was once. Some knowledge is kept, he said, not because it is false, but because it is dangerous in untrained hands. He held Aldous' eyes while he said it. What was in his face was neither scorn nor pity. It was nearer to arithmetic, a man weighing a thing and finding the sum useful. And Aldous, who was clever, felt for the space of a breath the floor tilt under him, a sudden certainty that he had not stumbled into the restricted room by his own daring at all, that the documents had been left where a hungry man would find them, that the third key had been easy, and the honest access 2 years past had been arranged, that he had been read as plainly as he himself read, and by the old man across the chamber, who had perhaps been waiting a long while for a young brother gifted enough, and starved enough, to be pointed east. Then the moment was gone. He could not keep hold of it. It was too large, and there was nothing beneath it but the old man's mild and patient face, and Aldous told himself it was only the fear talking. The judgment came: 5 years' service in a provincial temple. The place named was a village called Thorndale. He took it. He left the chamber. He did not see Malachi remain as the others filed out. He did not hear the few quiet words with Osric, no more than 4 minutes of them. He did not see Osric go back to the record afterward and set down a small notation before the ink had dried. The next morning, Brother Marcus in the records office received his copy of the order and began the transfer papers. He was careful with names and places. It was the whole of his pride. He looked the posting up in the provincial register before he drafted a word. Thorndale, Eastern Province. Small, remote, held under Lord Corvin. He was halfway down the page when the door opened. Elder Malachi seldom came to the records office. Marcus stood. The young brother's posting, Malachi said pleasantly. I wished to see the paper set down the council's intent true. Marcus showed him what he had written. Malachi looked at it and smiled. Thornhalf, he said gently, not Thorndale. The names sit close together, an easy slip. But the council said Thornhalf. That is where Brother Aldrich serves, the village by the eastern garrison, in Lord Tale's domain. Marcus looked down at his own notes, taken in haste, in a room with poor sound, in his own hurried hand. He found he could not say with certainty what they read. I was in the chamber, Malachi said. I am certain of what was spoken. Marcus wrote it again. Thornhalf. He carried the fair copy to Osric for the seal, and Osric signed it without reading the name, as he signed most things Marcus brought him, Marcus having never before made an error of any weight. The sealed order went out the following day. Aldous opened his posting in the cell where he had packed his few books. He read it twice. Thornhalf, not Thorndale. He had not known Thorndale. He knew Thornhalf. It stood in two of the accounts he had read by stolen light, once as a marker upon the line, and once in a list of settlements whose founding customs kept the shape of the old practice without the understanding of it. It sat within a few hours' walk of the boundary itself. It sat in the very district where, by the latest of the accounts, the stations had begun to fail faster than the writers could account for. Someone had sent him there on purpose. He thought of the old man's face, and the arithmetic that had been in it. He did not know what he was meant to do once he arrived. He did not know whether Malachi wished the thing in the east prevented, or hastened, or only watched and set down by a pair of young eyes that could read the old hands, and that no one would believe, if those eyes ever cried out. He did not know whether the old man was guarding the eastern districts, or the order, or some third thing he kept behind his mild face that had no name Aldous could put to it. What Aldous knew was this. He had read how the work was made. The accounts, meaning only to warn, had been too thorough by half, for to set down what must never be harmed is to set down, for any reader patient enough, where the harm would tell. He had read it the way a man reads the lock he means one day to open. He did not yet know that he meant to open it, but the knowing had settled in him now, cold and patient, the way his cleverness had always settled in him, and waited for a use. He folded the posting and put it in his pack. He was going east, to a village on the line, to the place where the things he had read of in the dark were not old paper but present weather, where a keeper kept a tower on an island in a lake, and where, if the far margin spoke true, some warden upon that line had held his post since the first marking and did not age, though whether that warden and the keeper of the tower were one man, or two men, or no man at all, the accounts did not say, and Aldous found that he could not stop wondering which. The order believed that it was punishing him. He had other intentions.